quick show of hands, has anybody ever been in a strained or toxic relationship? Something that really kind of weighed on you, whether it was a friend, co-worker, spouse. You raised your hand really high, I saw that. Anybody close to you. Now, most times you had a very close relationship in some way, whether it was work, friendly, it was professional. Those people spent a lot of time with you. And at some point, it might have caused some tension, and maybe, unfortunately, it might have even led to resentment. In 2014, I had a job working as a mechanical engineer at a small consulting firm in Manhattan. During my interview, I had expressed to my employer that I had limited experience, but that he was willing to provide me with some guidance or mentorship, that I was more than confident that I'd be able to learn quickly and I'd be able to adapt. He had nodded in agreement and he smiled and he reassured me. He said, "Yeah, I got you, don't worry about it, fine, cool." So, lo and behold, a couple of days later, I received an offer and I accepted the job. Not long after I started, though, I discovered that he wasn't really able to fulfill and deliver on his promise as we had both discussed and he had intended. Each day would start where he'd come into work, we'd exchange a friendly greeting. He'd talk a little bit with me, say hey, give me some general instructions for the day, some work for the projects that we might have had for the week, and he'd retreat to his office, only to check on me sporadically throughout the day. He was very easygoing at first, but as time wore on and the number and the volume of projects that we had acquired increased, so did his intensity. I also failed to mention that he had an extremely thick Russian accent. So you could understand that there was definitely some miscommunication that went on. This newfound language barrier and my inexperience caused me to make a couple errors, as most beginners do. And while most were small, whenever I brought them to my manager, I was harshly criticized. There was always something wrong. I never did anything right. And you can understand how this might have taken an impact or a hit to my self-confidence. I didn't quite feel confident in being a self-starter, taking the first step, taking the initiative. And as a result, that actually affected my work relationship with him. Over some time, it did become strained. It became hard to work with him. It became hard to feel as though I was trusted. And while it recovered in some sense, it was still affected. When I reflect back on this experience, I thought back to how everything had went, and I thought to myself, is there a way that I could have molded this relationship, kind of changed the course of it, so that how we worked, it would offer me a sense of support, encouragement, and most importantly, the constructive criticism that I needed to really spur my growth. I thought back to the healthy relationships that I had, the ones with my close friends and my parents and family. They offered me those things. And I asked myself, is there a way to kind of manipulate this to create lasting, valuable, beneficial relationships that would eventually be able to work with intent and purpose? Fast forward to the present, I recently graduated with my master's degree. I'm working as a product designer. And when I look back on that experience, I thought to myself, is there a way that I could apply the lessons that I learned, the design processes, all the experience that I have to create these relationships that are, once again, lasting, valuable, and beneficial? I decided that I wanted to find a way for someone who has no knowledge of design fundamentals to be able to use them to make an impact on their daily lives. Using 3 design elements: affordances, signifiers, and feedback. People can use them to create, once again, lasting, valuable, beneficial relationships. So let's start with the first one, affordances. Affordances refer to the relationship a person or a user has with the object that they're actually using. The relationship between the properties of this product and the capabilities of the person using it directly determine how the object can be used. Perfect example, you have a TV. A TV affords you entertainment, channels, sports, movies. If that TV is big and maybe you don't have the strength, right, there might be handles to lift it, but if you can't lift it, that relationship doesn't work. That doesn't work for you. Same goes with people. Affordances in regards to relationships refer to the capabilities of each person involved and the desired interaction that they'd like to have. If either party is incapable of fulfilling that responsibility, then the relationship or the affordance actually isn't possible. One thing I like to compare is long-distance relationships and close relationships, close-range relationships. For example, let's say New York to Los Angeles. Like a close-range relationship, long-distance relationships afford many of the same benefits: an emotional connection, love, support, and affection. The difference lies in the fact that long-distance relationships don't afford you the physical connection that most people need or long for. And if that's not something that's discussed between two people, or the other person can't afford that, or the other person longs for that physical connection, at some point, you could see you might run into some issues. So that's just a quick example. Second element, signifiers. Sometimes a user doesn't actually understand what affordance a product might give them. Sometimes you could say that they're not even aware that it exists at all. Designers use signifiers to locate a desired action. Quick example, if I gave you a remote and it had no colors, no symbols, nothing on it, everything was blank buttons, how would you know what button corresponds to which? You wouldn't. You would know that the power button, if it's red, there's a universal symbol for power. So you could go to 20 different remotes and you could look and you could say, okay, that red button in the top right corner, that's power. I know what that does. The same thing goes for relationships. Sometimes others don't know what we can offer to them, what we're capable of affording them in this relationship. So we use nonverbal communication, verbal communication, to convey these ideas. In friendly relationships or competitive relationships, there's no greater sense of camaraderie that you can get than when you're on a sports team, a member of a sports team, a fan of a sports team, or fans of shared rivals. I'm a fan of the New York Jets, and living in the state of Delaware for the past couple of years, I went to the University of Delaware. It's very easy to make friends, with Philadelphia Eagles fans. Walk into the bar, or actually, the reason being that our relationship is so close is that we share a strong disdain for the New England Patriots. It creates a sense of, endearment that not many people can really experience in this lifetime. It's interesting, I can go into a bar, sit, hang out, make a couple of Tom Brady jokes, maybe a Deflategate joke. Next thing I know, my new friend on the right of me, he buys the next round of beers. He's talking about Philly cheesesteaks. I'm talking about New York pizza and bagels. He's inviting me home for Thanksgiving. He gives me his parents' annual income before taxes combined. I need neither of that information. But you can understand how I made one statement. I told him, we're one and the same. You and I don't like a certain team. And that was enough for him to take my relation to him as a stranger, and he elevated that to an acquaintance. That made him comfortable enough. Third element, feedback. Feedback corresponds to the communication of the result of an action taken by a user. In the realm of products, feedback is extremely important because it tells you whether the action you took was correct, it was wrong, or in general, it's alerting you to something that requires your attention. With relationships, the same thing applies. It's important that you're interpreting and you're giving concise and effective feedback. Let's take a corporate setting, for example. You're working in a team, you're pitching a strategic business plan to a client, and you actually grab the deal for the company. It's a huge accomplishment, and everybody involved should be proud of themselves. Having positive reinforcement is a great way to be able to have a positive influence on the team dynamic going forward. Now, with feedback, it's not only important that you interpret and you receive it, but that you also respond. And so, with spouses, or maybe romantic relationships, maybe, do you really want to go to your in-laws this weekend? Probably not. But giving heavy sighs and pouting are not effective ways to actually go about doing so. In fact, it's probably going to increase the chances that you'll end up going anyway. Psst, I'm talking to you, Dad. And so, quick recap. We have affordances, signifiers, feedback. Affordances are the capabilities of each user and the desire or the desired interaction they'd like to have. That's the relationship that it creates. Signifiers are the methods of communication through which you actually communicate these capabilities and these affordances. And the feedback is the communication that's created from the results of the action taken by another. So one thing to note is that these things are kind of built like arrows in a way. And it kind of looks like a process, right? It's like a 1, 2, 3-step solution. These elements are actually not independent of one another, but they actually depend on one another. And most importantly, between signifiers and feedback, there seems to be some sort of cyclical loop that kind of comes into play. The idea that if I have an affordance or I'm looking for something from you, I'm going to signal it to you. I'm going to communicate that to you. Your response is the feedback to me. And if we're looking at it from my perspective, I'm going to signal again. And now, this instance can happen in a minute, a day, a week, a year, decades. The thing to understand is that this process, these steps, these elements, create a flow of actions and observations that we create with the relationships around us. And we should act with intent and purpose to make sure that we're actually manifesting the most positive results possible. And so through looking at this, we start to understand that as we change, as people, we're dynamic creatures, and as we change, so do the relationships that we're involved in and the relationships that we make up. And as these relationships mature and build over time, we have to continue with this process. It never ends. There is no start and no finish, but it actually is a cyclical reaction that is always ever revolving. Once you attain a relationship, your work's only begun. You now have to work to maintain and nurture this relationship. We have a commitment to be accountable to those that we call our friends, our family, our partners, our significant others, to serve them and be accountable to create the best positive results in the relationship between the two of us. Now, I'm not saying that we need to behave differently or approach relationships differently, but rather, I think we need to change the scope through which we perceive them to create the best product for one another. Thank you.